He's dead. 2 weeks now. The news struck Dust Creek at high noon, Texas sun beating down like fire upon the dusty street. Naomi Carter staggered, her worn valise slipping from her hand, red dust rising to stain the hem of her wrinkled cotton dress. The black woman who had traveled more than 1,000 miles from Georgia in search of a home found only a grave where her promised future was meant to be. Laughter cracked the air, sharp and merciless. Eyes turned her into sport. A bride, with no groom. The dry chorus lashed her back like whips. Naomi clutched her valise, sweat beading on her brow, eyes lost and hollow. And just then, the saloon doors burst open. A lone cowboy stepped out, hand resting lightly on the butt of his gun, pale eyes fixed on Naomi, not with contempt, but as though truly seeing her. Yet in this land, would that look stand as her shield, or mark the beginning of a debt more dangerous than death? In the year 1876, Dust Creek, a small town straddling the parched Texas land, breathed red dust with every gust of summer wind. The stagecoach rattled to a halt, its iron wheels grinding against the uneven earth as though dragging the weight of 100 weary miles. When the wheels ceased their turning, Naomi Carter lifted her hand to steady the frayed cloth valise that had carried her all the way from Georgia. Her calloused fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the knowing that this very moment, this step down, would alter her life forever. The driver grumbled, casting her a careless glance before nudging with his elbow for her to disembark. Naomi lowered the brim of her straw hat, smoothed the creased beige cotton dress that had borne the cramped days of travel, and drew in a deep breath. Then she set her foot upon the ground of Dust Creek. At once she felt the eyes. They were not warm. They were not welcoming. They were eyes that probed, eyes that doubted, eyes heavy with judgment. A black woman, alone, stepping down from a stagecoach into a western town where the fields burned under the sun and the wooden storefronts still smelled of horse manure. "Mail-order wife, that one?" A gravelly voice rang from the saloon porch. Laughter followed, brittle as dry grass crackling underfoot. Naomi bit down hard upon her lip. A boy of 10 darted across the street, pointing, his voice shrill as he shouted, "Mail-order bride! Mail-order bride!" The whole of the main street became a theater, and she, stranger, woman, black, was made spectacle for every watching eye. Naomi drew in a steady breath and straightened her back. She had borne such looks before in Georgia, where whitewashed houses hid the endless toil of those who shared her color. But there, at least, she had known the roads home, had memories to hold. Here all was strange, and every glance seemed to strip her bare. She clutched the valise tighter, the last remnant of a life gone by. Inside were only a few garments, her mother's worn Bible, and a letter of promise. Words of marriage written by Henry Walker, a man she had never met. Words that spoke with kindness, with hope. Words that had convinced her the West might yet offer a beginning. Naomi swallowed hard, wrenching her eyes away from the crowd. "This will be a new start," she whispered to herself, like a prayer she dared not stop repeating. But the whispers around her did not soften. Imagine it, leaving Georgia to marry a Walker. A colored woman in Dust Creek? Let's see how long she lasts. The words struck her ears, each syllable a thorn. Naomi gave no reply. She gripped the handle of her valise and forced her worn shoes to move forward without falter. The sun beat down, searing the road. The clang of hammer on iron rang from the smithy. Horses whinnied from nearby stables. Life in the town carried on, yet at the center of it, Naomi knew she was the nail that held every gaze. She remembered the day she left Georgia, a shabby boarding room, her hands shaking as she folded what little she owned. The tarnished mirror had shown a face younger than its years, but carved with fatigue. She had told herself then that distance could change her life, that if only one man would receive her, she could begin again. Now, before these smirking faces, Naomi understood. The first step into any new life was always the harshest, but turning back was no longer an option. Behind her, the stagecoach rattled away, leaving her alone upon the dusty street. Naomi lifted her chin. Fear still pressed heavy upon her chest, yet in her dark eyes flickered a spark of resolve. Georgia is past, she thought. Here is where I begin anew, whether they wish it or not. A hot wind whipped the grimy saloon curtain, carrying the stench of tobacco and cheap whiskey. Naomi blinked against the sweat tracing her temple. She turned her steps toward the street's end, where the wooden sign read Walker's General Store, the place she believed Henry Walker waited. She did not know that in that very moment, fate had drawn back its hand, ready to strike its first blow, so cruel it would shake even the fragile hope she had clung to all the way from Georgia. The noise from Dust Creek Saloon broke apart like a drum struck too hard. The warped wooden doors swung open, slamming against the wall. A drunk lurched out, his body reeking of whiskey, nearly collapsing into Naomi. Before she could step aside, a strong hand caught the back of his coat and yanked him back. The man staggered, swore, and fell in a heap on the porch planks. Naomi blinked. Where the drunk had been, another figure now stood before her. Tall, broad-shouldered, the sun's glare drawing dust into the folds of his trail-worn coat. Elias Monroe. In Dust Creek they called him the Shadow on the Prairie, a man of few words who seemed to appear where none expected. His gaze fell first upon the worn valise in Naomi's hand, then lifted, steady and unflinching, to meet her dark eyes. In that look, Naomi felt both exposed and, for the first time since she had stepped down from the coach, truly seen. Not as a curiosity, not as a jest, but as a human being. "You're here for Henry Walker?" His voice was low, rasped by wind and dust, yet certain. Naomi's throat tightened. She managed only a nod, afraid her voice would betray its tremor. Elias drew a breath, heavy, as if the burden of the land itself pressed on his chest. He turned his face aside for a moment, then said slowly, "He's dead, 2 weeks ago." The words struck like a rifle shot. Naomi's knees weakened, the valise in her grip twice as heavy. Around her the sounds of town, horse hooves, the hiss of laughter, the scrape of wind against the eaves, faded into a blur. All that remained was the echo in her mind. "He's dead." "No, it can't be." Her lips moved, but no sound carried. The street fell still. Where a moment before there had been mocking laughter, now came only low whispers, sharp with curiosity, cruel with delight. Some mouths curved into knowing smirks, waiting for the spectacle to unfold. Naomi clenched the handle of her valise. Every coin she had saved, every sleepless night, every prayer she had whispered was bound up in this journey. Now all of it shattered with a single breath. "Henry, dead?" she finally whispered, so faint she hardly recognized her own voice. Elias nodded. "Shot in a card game, not the man his letters claimed him to be." His eyes softened a shade, his voice lowering. He wasn't the kind you hoped for, Miss Carter. Her legs buckled. She sank to the porch step, the valise falling beside her. The letters came rushing back. The careful script, the tender promises of a home, a fresh beginning. Nothing but fragile illusions, now turned to ash. A gust swept through the street, driving red dust against her dress. She did not brush it away. Her eyes, hollow and distant, looked past to the faces around her as though the world itself had receded. Elias did not move to offer false comfort. He simply stood, silent, letting the truth take its weight upon her. Behind them, the drunk hauled himself upright, muttered curses, and staggered back through the swinging doors. The saloon settled once more into its sullen hum, as if nothing had happened at all. Naomi pressed her hands against her face. The tears came quietly, slipping down her cheeks, soaking the collar of her dress. She did not wail, did not crumble, only let the grief fall in silence. The townsfolk watched, whispering, some sneering, some curious. To them, she was still a spectacle, but to Elias, in that moment, she was not a joke. He tilted his head, speaking low enough only for her to hear. "How far did you come to get here?" Naomi's breath quivered. "More than 1,000 miles. From Georgia." Elias nodded once, pale eyes narrowing against the sun. In them lay something unreadable. Pity, weariness, perhaps a flicker of resolve. Naomi wiped at her tears, lifted the valise. Henry was gone. Her hope was gone. But return was no longer an option. She drew in a hard breath. If fate has stripped me of what I sought, then I'll find another reason to endure. Elias's lips pressed as if to form words, but none came. He only turned, still watching her, as though he knew. From this moment on, Naomi Carter was no longer merely a stranger stepping into Dust Creek. She was a name the town would remember. And he, Elias Monroe, had already become part of her story. Naomi felt her knees give way, drained of all strength. The valise slipped from her hand and struck the ground with a dull thud. The sound was not loud, yet it jarred her, as though reminding her that everything she owned, everything her life had been gathered into, was contained in that worn bag, and the very reason she had carried it more than 1,000 miles had just vanished. The air pressed thick and stifling, heavy with dust. From the saloon porch came the clatter of cards, the ring of glasses, the laughter of men, but to Naomi they seemed muffled, distant, warped behind a curtain. Every laugh twisted, mocking, stabbing at her chest like knives. Elias stood nearby, tall, unmoving, like the shadow of a lone tree in the burning noon. His eyes were neither pitying nor cold. They were the eyes of one who knew that the truth, no matter how cruel, had to be spoken, even if it broke another heart. Naomi bent, her hands trembling as she lifted the valise again. Her fingers felt stiff, as though the frayed handle weighed more than stone. She tried to breathe deep, but the air stuck in her chest, caught between a cry and a sob. "It can't be." Her voice broke, thin and shaking. "I have letters. Letters from him only weeks ago." Elias drew in a slow breath, removed his hat, turned it in his hands. His gaze lifted, his tone rough yet steady. "Letters travel long roads, Miss Carter. Henry Walker was shot dead in a crooked card game at the saloon down this very street, 2 weeks back. They say he owed money, cheated the cards, quarreled, and one bullet ended it. Naomi shook her head, unwilling to believe. In the letters from Texas, Henry Walker had written of being an upright merchant, a man with a prosperous store, seeking a good wife to share his life. He had written of a sturdy house, of evenings spent watching cattle drift across the yard, of security and rest from the hardships of Georgia. And now, with one short telling, all of it had scattered like dust in the wind. Naomi pressed her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Hot tears spilled, tracing down her dark cheeks. She fought them, but they would not stop. She had promised herself she would not cry before these staring eyes, that she would hold her head high. But the strength she had clung to cracked in this moment. It was over. The journey, the hope, the promises. All that remained was an emptiness vast and merciless. In her mind came the picture of the small boarding room in Georgia, where she had counted each coin from her needlework, piecing together the fare. Nights spent sewing by lamplight, patching cloth for pennies more. She had sold her mother's shawl, her father's little silver ring, only to buy a ticket west. And now here she stood, alone, broken-hearted, her purse near empty. Another gust swept the street, lashing red dust against her cotton skirt. Passers-by still turned to look. A few laughed aloud. The sting cut sharper. A black woman in a white sun. Texas town had always been an outsider. Now, with this news, she was nothing more than the public's entertainment. Elias glanced about, then stepped closer. His voice dropped, meant only for her. "You gave everything to this journey, didn't you?" Naomi nodded faintly. No strength left for pretense. "I have nothing left. I cannot go back." Her words broke into sobs this time, harsh and ragged. Not the soft tears of weakness, but the choking cries of one who had walked a long road only to find it ended in a wall of stone. Elias did not touch her shoulder, nor offer easy comfort. He let her weep, let the tears wash away the illusion of a life Henry Walker had never intended. He knew this land well enough. Mercy was rare, and truth was the only thing that made a person rise again. After a time, Naomi wiped her face with the back of her hand, her breath still rough, her eyes raw. She forced her voice steady. "So it was all lies?" In his letters he wrote of being an honest tradesman. Elias narrowed his eyes, the corner of his mouth bending into a sorrowful curve. Not mockery, but the recognition of a truth he had seen too often. There are men in the West who live by false signatures and crooked cards. Henry Walker was one of them. Words on a page mean nothing, Miss Carter. He was no honest man. And his death was nothing but the fate he carved for himself. Naomi listened, her heart hollow. The last of her illusions crumbled. No Henry, no promised house, no safe refuge. Only herself alone, stranded on a land she did not know. She clutched the valise tight against her chest, staring down the dust-blown street, at the strange faces, the probing eyes. None of them cared for the ruin in her soul. Naomi drew a sharp breath, forcing her spine straight. Though her cheeks still wet with tears, she whispered to herself, "If this is the void, then I must be the one to fill it." Elias gave a faint nod, as if he had glimpsed the fragile spark beginning to kindle in her. But he said no more. In this land, promises meant nothing. Only deeds mattered. And he knew her true trial had only just begun. Elias stood silent for a long moment, as if weighing whether to let Naomi fend for herself or to step forward. On Dust Creek's main street, the sun was sinking low, dragging the shadows of weathered buildings across the dusty ground. Naomi stood within that shadow, small and still, her worn valise at her feet, and her gaze adrift. None in the crowd made a move toward her. Some cast curious glances, others smirked. A few women whispered behind their hands, their lips curled in half-smiles. To them, the sight of a black woman who had traveled from afar for a purchased marriage only to be told her groom was dead was little more than free entertainment. Elias tipped his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the stares. Then his voice came low and steady. "Henry owed me land. Before he died, he signed over the deed to settle the debt. A cabin and a stretch by the creek are mine now." Naomi's head lifted, startled. He continued slow, as though steadying himself with the words, "I need someone to keep that place. A cabin cannot sit empty, and my hands are full with cattle. If you want it, I'll pay you wages. You'd live separate, with work and a roof overhead. No one to meddle." Naomi tightened her grip on the valise. Her thoughts whirled. The shock of Henry's death had not faded, and now came this strange offer from a man she scarcely knew. To work as caretaker, to live on land once promised by Henry. Was fate mocking her so cruelly as to set her upon the ashes of a liar's inheritance? Her lips parted, but no answer came. Then a thin laugh cut through the air. "Well, the little bride has arrived at last." Naomi turned sharply. From the saloon doorway, a man emerged. His gray coat was frayed, yet his polished boots and the gold ring on his right hand caught the dying light. Broad-shouldered, tall, a smile crooked across his face, and in his eyes flickered something sharp and dangerous. "Thomas Walker," Elias muttered, his pale eyes hardening like steel. The man descended the steps slowly, hands thrust into his pockets, his smirk never leaving. He dipped his head toward Naomi as though acknowledging a piece of property newly delivered. "My brother Henry paid for you. Everyone here knows it. And now he's dead. By simple right. Everything of his, including you, falls to me." The words landed heavy as stone. Naomi froze. Heat surged to her face, her ears rang. Around her, the street broke into ripples of laughter, whispers swelling like a rising tide. A whistle rang out. A voice jeered, "Ha! A colored bride changing hands. Dust Creek's never had better theater." Naomi bit her lip until blood rose. Could it be true? Henry's brother thought to claim her as inheritance? Elias stepped forward, half a pace, placing himself between Naomi and Thomas. His voice rasped, but rang clear. "She's no chattel to be claimed. Henry's lies in letters gave no man the right to inherit another soul." Thomas laughed, loud and rolling down the street. He looked Elias over as if at a fool. In this town, law rests in the hands of men with guns, Monroe. And I've got both gun and money." The crowd roared again. But Naomi, though her chest tightened, kept her back straight. She clutched the valise to her, met Thomas's gaze, and in her eyes burned a spark of fire. "I belong to no man. Not you. Not anyone." Her words came firm, though her voice shook. The defiance drew gasps, a few chuckles, a muttered, "Brave, but foolish," from a woman near the churchyard gate. Thomas's grin twisted, his boots crunching closer. But Elias lifted a hand, stopping him. His palm rested on the butt of his revolver, not drawn, but gleaming just enough in the fading sun. The air froze. Laughter died. A dry wind pushed dust across the gap between them, swirling in a small storm. Elias did not blink. His voice fell heavy as a hammer. "She walks with no one but me. You hear that clear?" It was not shouted, yet it carried through the street like iron striking wood. Men in the saloon shifted, their boots scraping, hands brushing weapons, waiting to see if blood would follow. Thomas halted. His smile lingered, but his eyes turned dark. He let his gaze rake over Naomi, a blade's edge in the look, then swung back to Elias, his words a hiss. "You won't keep her long. Trouble's found you now, Monroe." With that, he turned, striding down the street, leaving whispers and unease in his wake. Naomi stood trembling, unsure whether from fear or fury. In that instant, she knew. What she had thought a road to a home built from letters was instead a path into peril. Yet amid the dust and the threat, one thing was clear. Elias Monroe had chosen to stand with her. And his words, "She walks with no one but me," still rang in her ears, thin as thread but strong enough to hold her from the edge of despair. The laughter of the crowd broke out like the crack of a whip, sharp and stinging. A blacksmith braced his hand on his hip, his voice booming. "Two brothers sharing one black bride, Dust Creek's finest joke." The shout set off a chorus of hoots up and down the main street. Men chewing tobacco spat at the ground, flecks landing near Naomi's shoes as if to mark a boundary, as if to declare she would never belong here. Cowboys lounged against the saloon rails, whistling and clapping, while women covered their mouths with kerchiefs, their eyes glinting with cold disdain. Naomi clutched the valise tight to her chest, blood rushing hot to her face. In a flash, she was back in Georgia, standing in the kitchens of white houses, her back aching from scrubbing, her ears raw from insult. Then she had bowed her head, swallowed the fire, for resistance only brought the lash. But today was different. Her shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the strain of holding back tears. Naomi drew a deep breath, lifted her chin, letting the late sun blaze across her dark features, her hair bound close, her eyes black and unyielding. She did not turn away. She did not bow. Across the street, a child tugged at his mother's skirts, shouting, "Mama, is that the bride from the paper? Why's she got another husband now?" The innocent cry set the crowd roaring. The mother pulled the boy close, but her lips twisted in contempt all the same. Each word struck Naomi like arrows, but instead of retreating, she stood rooted. Her hands gripped the worn handle of her bag until her knuckles whitened, as though inside it she held not clothes, but the very measure of her dignity. An older man with hair gone silver rose slowly from the smithy's porch. His gaze lingered on Naomi, not with scorn, but with a weary mixture of pity and warning. He shook his head, his voice hoarse with smoke. "Girl, this land ain't for the likes of you. Best turn back where you came from." Naomi faced him, her lips trembling, but her voice steady, ringing clear. "I've come more than 1,000 miles to stand here. I have no road back, and I need no one to tell me where I may live." For a moment, the street fell quiet. Then the jeers rose again, laughter, spitting, curses muttered low. Yet something in the straightness of her back and the fire in her eyes kept a few from meeting her gaze. On the saloon porch, Thomas Walker folded his arms, smirking. His words slipped out low, meant for ears near him, but loud enough to spread. "Hold your head high, girl. Soon enough you'll learn no one here stands with you." Elias Monroe remained at Naomi's side, silent as stone, pale eyes sharp with warning. He did not silence the mob, nor trade words with Thomas. He only shifted, placing his broad frame fully before her, blocking the weight of every stare. Naomi felt it. In that moment, with the whole town making sport of her, Elias's quiet presence was a shield. No man touched her, not by word, nor by hand, so long as he stood there. A wind swept from the fields, spinning dust into the air. From far off, the church bell tolled, its iron peal cutting the tension in two. Naomi told herself, "They will not see me break. If I fall now, every mile I walked to reach this place will have been wasted." She smoothed the folds of her beige cotton dress, lifted her chin higher, and fixed her eyes down the sun-drenched street where the evening light poured red and blinding. In that instant, Naomi knew she might not be welcome, but she was here, and her presence could not be denied. From a shaded corner, an old peddler woman murmured, her voice low but clear enough for Naomi to hear, "This girl, stronger than they reckon." Naomi turned, catching the woman's gaze for a fleeting heartbeat. For the first time since stepping off the coach, she met eyes that carried no contempt, no mockery, only the faintest glimmer of recognition. And that flicker was enough to steady her. The mockery swelled on, but Naomi no longer heard each word. They blurred into wind, into dust, into the distant pounding of hooves. Within her, something new was stirring. The belief that even among a sea of laughter, she could still choose how to stand. And that, she realized, was her first victory on this harsh and foreign land. The jeers of the crowd had not yet died when Thomas Walker stepped fully into the street. His tall frame loomed, a black coat sweeping the dust, an evil curl fixed upon his lips. Each boot struck the ground with a heavy thud, daring defiance as he closed in on Naomi. "My brother paid for you," he hissed, each word sliding through his teeth. "He's dead now, so it falls to me. Out here, what belongs to a walker never slips to another hand." Naomi hugged the valise tighter to her chest. Her heart thundered wild, yet her chin stayed high. Years of enduring scorn in Georgia had carved into her one truth. If nothing else remained, she would guard her dignity. Thomas stretched out his hand, filthy fingers reaching for the bag. For a split second, Naomi saw herself dragged, handled like goods on an auction block. Her body locked, every muscle taut, but her feet did not retreat. Then a firm arm barred the way. Elias Monroe. The silent cowboy stepped forward at last, standing between her and Thomas like a wall of flesh and bone. His cold blue gaze fixed hard upon the intruder, unflinching. His hand lowered to rest upon the grip of his revolver, not fast, not rash, but slow enough that the whole street held its breath. His voice cut through the heavy air, gravel deep. "She walks with no one but me." The words rang out like a shot, shattering the tension. Every whistle, every sneer, every laugh fell still. Dust Creek froze. Behind him, Naomi's hands still shook, but inside her chest a new flame caught. For the first time, someone had stood in the open street, before every eye, and claimed her worth. Thomas's hand hung stiff, his smirk twisting to rage. His face contorted, his voice spat out like venom. "Don't think you'll hold her long, Monroe. You've brought trouble on your head." He stepped back, eyes still burning through Naomi, then spat into the dirt. His voice carried sharp as steel. "All of Dust Creek knows, what a walker wants, a walker takes. I'll be back." His figure vanished into the press of men. But the threat lingered, echoing like hammer strikes against Naomi's chest. No one spoke. Only the creak of wood in the wind, the faint jingle of horse tack in the distance, and Naomi's heart drumming fast within her. Elias remained, tall, unyielding, his body shielding her from the weight of every stare. His hand slid away from the revolver, but his head tilted slightly, checking her. In his eyes, she caught something more than a gunman's vigilance. She saw resolve, a vow unspoken that she would never again be bartered like stock. The crowd, disappointed at the lack of gunfire, drifted off in murmurs. Cowboys shrugged, women whispered behind their hands, leaving only the whispers of threat in the dust. Naomi exhaled, her shoulders still tight. Her knees nearly gave way, and she stepped back. Elias turned to her then, his gaze softening, his words few. "You all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale, her smile a brittle crack in glass. "All right," she whispered. "It's only, no one has ever spoken for me before." Elias did not answer. He only gave a small nod, his glance resting on the valise she clutched so fiercely. A silent nod, as if to tell her she was no longer alone. Down the street, the piano from the saloon picked up again, mingling with rough laughter, the town already moving on as though the scene had been mere amusement. But for Naomi, it had carved itself deep. She tightened her hold on the bag, lifted her eyes to the sky flushed red with sunset. Inside her echoed his words, heavy as iron. "She walks with no one but me." Not a vow, not a proposal, not a claim. A line drawn clear, a defense declared before all. Naomi knew Thomas's threat would return like a storm. Yet in the same breath, a seed had been planted. A seed of trust that perhaps she would not face this land's cruelty alone. The road out of Dust Creek stretched long and narrow, rough beneath the wagon wheels. Sunset bled across half the sky, casting red fire over the land, dragging the shadows of two horses and the creaking rig down the dry dirt. Naomi sat beside Elias, clutching her worn valise as if it held the last scrap of her life. The steady beat of hooves struck the earth like the pounding of her own unsettled heart. Behind them, the town shrank into the distance, faded rooftops and drifting red dust, swallowed in the wind. Naomi looked back once, and in her chest rose a strange tangle. Relief at leaving its cruelty, sorrow at departing a place that had never welcomed her. Elias spoke not a word through the ride, glancing at her only now and again, his pale eyes measuring whether she could endure. He was a man of silence, but every movement of his carried strength. Naomi gripped her skirt to steady her breath. The faces of Dust Creek haunted her still, the laughter, Thomas Walker's grasping hand, and above it all, Elias's rough voice declaring, "She walks with no one but me." After more than an hour's ride, the trail opened into a small valley. A creek curved through the land, its water glinting gold under the last light. By its bank stood a modest cabin, waiting as though it had stood all these months for this very arrival. Elias pointed ahead. "That's the land Henry owed me. The cabin's been empty a while." The wagon halted before the porch. Elias dismounted first, then offered his hand. Naomi stepped down, the cool air from the creek brushing her face, fresh, unlike the choking haze of Georgia. The cabin was plain, sun-bleached timber, a roof weathered gray, a porch barely wide enough for two. Yet the frame stood steady, the stone base firm, the shuttered windows intact. Naomi felt her heart ease a little, as though this place might indeed be a beginning. Elias climbed the steps, drew a ring of keys from his coat, and placed them into her trembling hand. His palm was broad, hardened by sun and work, hers small, dark, quivering as she received them. "From now on, this is yours," Elias said, his voice slow, certain. Naomi exhaled, clutching the iron tight. She felt her throat ache, the urge to weep close. She had traveled so far, holding only the hope of marriage to Henry Walker. That hope was ash. Yet now, as Elias gave her the keys, she realized something greater might be within reach, not a man's promise, but a place of her own. The hinges groaned as Elias pushed the door wide. Dust stirred. The smell of old wood and char lingered in the air. Light slid through the small window, revealing a room sparse and worn, a scarred table, 2 crooked chairs, a hearth with cold ash, a bed pressed against the wall. It was meager. But to Naomi, who had left a dingy Georgia room and crossed 1,000 miles, it was warm with possibility. Here no laughter would mock her, no hand would claim her as property. She crossed the threshold, fingertips brushing the dusty table. Each step left her mark upon the floorboards. Standing in the center, she turned back. Elias lingered in the doorway, his tall frame cut against the fading sky. "You truly mean to give this to me?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Henry left debts, but I have no use for a cabin this small. My ranch is wide enough, my stock plenty. You need shelter. I need the place kept. Call it square. No one owing anyone." Naomi pressed the key in her palm, her vision blurring. Kindness was rare in her life, rarer still from strangers. Yet Elias's words bore no claim, no false charm, only truth. She whispered, "Thank you." His pause was brief, his answer low. "No need for thanks. Out here, everyone starts somewhere. This is yours to start." The words sank deep, her beginning. Always she had followed paths laid by others, her parents, the shopkeepers, the whispers of a town. Now, for the first time, a door opened for her alone. Night drew near. Elias stoked the hearth, coaxing fire into the room. The glow leapt along the walls, shadows of 2 figures stretching high, proof that life now stirred here again. Naomi unpacked her few belongings, simple dresses, her mother's tattered Bible, the shawl she had carried from childhood. She set them upon the table, and at once the bare room felt touched by her presence. Elias adjusted the sagging door. "I'll ride back to the ranch. Tomorrow I'll send supplies. The cabin's sound, close to water. If anything comes, light the lamp on the porch. I'll see it." He drew his hat low, turned for his horse. Naomi followed, standing in the doorway. The night breeze lifted her skirt, and she watched his silhouette bind the reins, framed against the violet dusk. "Elias," she called, testing herself in speaking his name. He turned. Naomi's lips pressed, then parted. "Thank you for not letting them take me as if I were nothing." His eyes flickered, half pity, half respect. He gave a slow nod, mounted. "Good night, Naomi." His figure slipped into the dark. Naomi lingered long before shutting the door. Inside, the fire burned. Shadows swayed on the timbered walls, whispering that she was not entirely alone. That night, she sat by the hearth, listening to the wind through the seams, the murmur of the creek beyond. She drew her breath steady, pushing the fear down. Her hand slid over the old table, and there, beneath dust and silence, she was about to find something that would change everything. Night fell swiftly over the valley. Darkness crept down with the sound of wind slipping through the cracks of timber, whispering like voices that would not cease. Naomi sat close by the hearth, her hands stretched toward the flame for warmth, though her shoulders still quivered. It was not the chill of the Texas night alone, but the weight of a day that had shattered her bearings. The firelight leapt against the walls, painting the grain of aged wood, the scars carved deep by years. In that small room, the crackle of burning logs was the only sound filling the silence. Naomi held her knees close, eyes fixed upon the shifting glow, searching for calm. She thought of Elias, the tall frame of him as he rode away, leaving only his brief words behind. For the first time in years, she had felt seen as more than a shadow. Yet even that kindness could not fill the hollow left inside her. Henry Walker was dead, and she teetered on the edge of a void. The cabin seemed to breathe with her. Every object wore its own stillness. The scarred table, the limping chairs, the narrow bed. And there, half open, the drawer of the table, darkness within hinting at something hidden. Naomi hesitated, then rose, each step creaking the boards. Her pulse quickened as she tugged the drawer. Dust lifted in a small cloud. Inside lay scraps, a broken quill, a half-scribbled note, and a pale envelope unsealed. Her fingers shook as she drew it out. In the corner of the paper was handwriting she knew. Tidy, deliberate. The very script she had read and reread across months. Henry Walker's. She sank back into the chair, the envelope upon the table, the firelight casting her shadow tall across the wall. Her lips pressed thin, torn between slamming the drawer shut and never knowing, or opening it and facing a truth she feared. The hunger for certainty won. She slid the paper free. The words spread across the page, cold and clear. Mr. Perkins, I write to confirm our arrangement. The girl from Georgia, Naomi Carter, will arrive within weeks. As agreed, I will collect her dowry upon her arrival. What becomes of her afterward is no concern of mine. Once I secure the money, I will soon sell off the cabin, closing my debt. Do not worry. Women like her are easily led. A few sweet letters are all it takes. Henry Walker. Naomi went still. The page trembled in her hands, the flame etching each word deeper. The room seemed to reel. The man she had trusted, the man whose letters had been her beacon, had never wanted her. He had only wanted her money. It was a swindle, plain and bare. The letter fell to the table. Naomi covered her face, tears burning through her palms. They came not only of despair, but of fury. So this was it. From the first line of ink, I was nothing but a bargain. Her mind raged through memories. Nights bent over needlework, coins scraped together. Her mother's shawl sold. Her father's silver ring pawned, all to purchase a lie. Her tears dropped fast, but amid them something rose stronger. Naomi lifted her head. Her eyes, wet with grief, now glimmered with steel. This letter, the proof of Henry's deceit, was no longer a wound alone. It was a weapon, a shield. Evidence to guard her when others sought to bind her again. She folded the page with careful hands, slipped it into the pocket of her dress. Then she sat once more by the fire, its glow dancing against her steady face. Within her, the void began to fill, not with hope of Henry, but with resolve. The night dragged on. The wind hissed against the walls, but Naomi no longer trembled as before. She sat upright, fingers brushing the keys Elias had placed in her hand. A cabin key, and now a letter. Two small things that had become the cornerstones of her next step, the beginning of a life claimed by her own hand. Outside, the moon climbed high, silvering the creek's steady song. And in the little cabin, a woman sat by firelight, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. From that moment forward, Naomi Carter was no longer the girl who dreamed of a home in another man's words. She had turned her wound into strength and vowed, never again, not to the walkers, nor to anyone, would she be bought. The first morning in the little cabin, Naomi woke with sunlight just beginning to slip through the cracks of the shutter. Birds called sharp and sweet, mingling with the murmur of the creek beyond, a song foreign but alive. She sat up, fingers still wrapped around the ring of keys, as if afraid that when she opened her eyes, it might all dissolve into dream. But no, the worn walls, the cold hearth, the valise by her bed were proof that this new life had indeed begun. She pulled on her faded quilted jacket, bound her curls into a knot, and pushed the cabin door wide. Morning air rushed in, cool and fresh, carrying the smell of pine resin, damp earth, and the faint must of old hay. Naomi filled her lungs, the breath swelling her chest with something she had not known in Georgia's crowded alleys. The first task was to sweep. From a corner she found a broom of stiff straw and set to work, dust rising from the floorboards, from the table's scarred edges, from the window frames. The air thickened with motes, making her sneeze, her brow damp with sweat. Yet her heart was oddly light. This was not the toil of a bought bride. It was the labor of her own hands, in her own place. When the cabin was brighter, Naomi dragged a chair to the porch and opened her valise. Inside, she drew out a small cloth pouch, the one treasure her mother had pressed into her hand. Seeds. A few beans, some corn, a bundle of mustard greens her grandmother had once saved. She touched them as though touching the hands that had come before. Then she rolled her sleeves and went to the patch of bare earth behind the cabin. The soil was soft, rich, and dark. Naomi knelt, dug narrow furrows, set each seed with care, covered them, and carried water from the creek to pour over them. Sweat streaked her temples, but her eyes shone. Each seed was more than food. It was a beginning, proof that her life might root here too. By noon, as Naomi was clearing the yard, Martha arrived, Hank's wife, sturdy, sun-browned, with eyes that held warmth. She carried a basket of eggs and loaves. "These hens need tending," Martha said, nodding toward the sagging coop. "Elias told me you'd be here. Best you learn. Not hard, just patience." Naomi flushed, shy. In Georgia, she had known only needle and thread, never chickens. But Martha guided her, how to scatter grain, how to change straw, how to tell young eggs from old. Naomi fumbled at first, the hens clucking and scattering. Martha laughed gently. "We all start clumsy. You'll find your way." Through the afternoon, Naomi worked, her arms sore, her skirt dusty. But when the hens finally settled to peck grain in peace, she felt something stir in her chest. This, she thought, was the first fruit of her labor. Yet kindness did not follow her everywhere. Toward evening, Naomi walked with Martha into town for salt and lamp oil, and once again, the whispers followed. "There she is, the colored girl Henry bought. Now living off, Elias, no better than stock." Naomi heard every word. Heat flushed her face. Her heart stung sharp, but she did not bow. She gripped the basket in her hands, lifted her spine straight, and walked on. Martha touched her arm lightly, a quiet show of solidarity. Back at the cabin, Naomi lit the lamp. The room, now swept clean, felt less hollow. She ate bread and boiled egg, then sat by the window watching the moon climb. For the first time in many days, she did not feel herself only a cast-off soul. The next morning, while Naomi watered the rose she had planted, Elias came, leading a small brown mare, gentle-eyed, reins loose in his hand. Naomi stared. "This horse?" He nodded, holding the rope toward her. "Yours. Out here, everyone must learn to stand on their own. You'll need more than hope to go far. A horse will give you that." Naomi reached to stroke its mane, her heart swelling. The animal snorted softly, pressing its head into her palm. Elias's gaze was steady, quiet but warm. "You'll need time to learn, but you will." Naomi looked from the mare to the garden, then back to the cabin. For the first time since setting foot in Dust Creek, her lips curved into a smile. Not the mask she had worn to hide her ache, but a true smile. Fragile, radiant, born of strength found within herself. Small as it was, that smile burned brighter than any fire against the long night. In the days that followed, Naomi began to settle into the rhythm of cabin life. The bean rows pushed tender shoots through the soil, the hens clucked around the yard, and the small horse she had been given grew used to her hand guiding it by the creek. Each morning, drawing water from the well and watching sunlight spill across her garden, Naomi felt a new thing stir within her, the sense of owning her days at last. But peace did not linger long. On a sweltering afternoon, while Naomi gathered kindling at the edge of the woods, dust rose along the road. A wagon rolled to a stop before the porch. Out climbed Crenshaw, the saloon keeper of Dust Creek, sharp-eyed, greedy, stinking faintly of whiskey. His red face glistened, his rumpled vest strained with false dignity, and in his hand he carried a folded sheaf of papers. Naomi froze, clutching her basket of sticks tight. "Miss Carter," his voice rasped with confidence, "I've come to claim what's owed me." Naomi frowned, clutching the basket to her chest. "Owed? I don't understand." Crenshaw smirked, waving the papers. "Thomas Walker sold me his brother Henry's debt. It states plain, you are collateral on the sum unpaid. Which means, girl, you belong to me now." The words struck like a pit opening beneath her. Once more the shadow fell over her, her life weighed and bartered, reduced to ink on paper. "No, I'm not anyone's," Naomi said, her voice trembling yet firm. "Oh, but the paper says so." Crenshaw thrust it toward her, blotched with scribble and a faded seal. "Law here is simple, Miss Carter. The one who holds the paper holds the right." Naomi stepped back, her spine cold. Her fingers remembered the envelope tucked safe in her dress. The letter she had found. Henry Walker's confession of deceit. Would that scrap of truth be enough to shatter this snare? Hoofbeats thundered up the lane. Elias Monroe rode in, Hank and Samuel trailing behind, their shirts still dusted from the fields. Elias drew his horse hard, pale eyes flashing cold as he took in the scene. "What's this?" His voice ground low, taut as wire. Crenshaw swung round, brandishing the paper. "I've the lawful claim. Thomas Walker sold me the debt. The girl is mine." Elias dismounted, his stride long. his frame casting Naomi in shadow. He took the sheet from Crenshaw's hand, glanced at it, then gave a sharp, bitter laugh. "This scrap means nothing," Elias said, his voice iron. "Henry Walker never owned a human soul. Debt cannot turn flesh into property." Crenshaw's face reddened. "Law here don't need fine words. Money rules. Thomas said so, I believe it." Naomi, heart racing, set down her basket. She stepped forward, hand pulling the crumpled letter from her pocket. Her voice rang clear, edged with steel. "This is truth. Henry Walker wrote it himself. He planned to marry me only for dowry. I was never his wife. I never signed to any bargain. I am no debt, no pledge." She handed it to Elias, who raised it high. Hank and Samuel scanned it, their faces hardening. Hank spat into the dust, his jaw set. "Her paper's true. What you've got is Walker's trickery." Naomi lifted her chin, her eyes burning bright. For the first time, she was not resisting with silence, but with proof in her hand. Crenshaw lunged to snatch his paper back, but Elias folded it neat and slid it into his coat. His eyes turned cold as winter steel. "Come here again with such lies, and I'll call it what it is: kidnapping. And Dust Creek will not forgive a thief." The air thickened. Crenshaw looked around, saw Hank and Samuel standing solid at Elias's back, shoulders squared. For the first time, his bluster faltered. He hissed, "Fine, but she won't escape. Thomas will come for her." He mounted, snapped his reins, and rattled away in a storm of dust. Naomi exhaled hard, her knees near to giving. Elias caught her arm, steadying her. His gaze softened, his words low. "You did well." Naomi looked up at him, eyes wet yet resolute. "No one will ever buy me again." Elias gave a short nod, nothing more. He knew words mattered less than what she had just done. Naomi Carter had stood for herself, turned a letter into a blade, and cut free of the snare. When evening draped the valley, Naomi sat on the porch, watching her young garden glow green in the sunset. Her body still shook, but beneath the fear lay something stronger: the certainty that she was no longer a commodity in any man's ledger. That evening, the late sun spilled gold over the tender rows of beans, fresh from last night's rain. The soil was soft. The scent of damp earth mingled with wild grass across the valley. Naomi stood on the porch, her hand resting against the timber post, gazing out at the little garden before the cabin. Ground that weeks ago had been barren. Green beans lined the furrows. Young corn stood reaching. Chickens scattered across the yard pecking at grain. From the eaves, the oil lamp Elias had brought cast a pale amber glow, turning the cabin into something warmer than its weathered walls suggested. Naomi's heart stirred strangely. The scene mirrored what she had once dreamed of in Georgia: a quiet home, a place to sow and tend, to watch life grow. Yet standing within it now, a hollow rose inside her. Was this truly what she wanted? Or was it merely a safe wall against the storm? Hoofbeats broke the stillness. Elias returned from the range, coat dusted, frame upright and solid. He tethered his horse, then climbed the porch. The sunset caught in his pale eyes, calm yet unyielding. He looked to the garden, then to Naomi. There was no judgment in his gaze, no claim, only acknowledgement. "You've made something here," Elias said, voice low. Naomi's smile flickered, shy. "I only did what was needed." For a moment he was silent. The wind tugged a strand of hair loose across her brow. Then he sighed, turning his eyes westward, where the sun sank in flame. "Naomi," he said slowly, "you owe me nothing. Not Dust Creek, not the past, not Henry Walker. This land, this cabin, I gave you the key, but the choice is yours. If you wish to leave, you can walk away any time." The words fell like a bell through the valley. Naomi blinked, her chest tight. Relief stirred. No one claimed her, no one bound her. Yet alongside it rose disquiet. If she could go, where would she go? She studied Elias, arms folded, standing firm as stone. His voice had held no demand. He was prepared for her choice, even if that choice was leaving. Naomi lowered her gaze to her hands, hands that had once trembled as Thomas Walker tried to seize her valise, hands bloodied by seed and soil, hands that clutched Henry's letter of betrayal. Now they bore new calluses, new steadiness. Was safety enough? The question echoed inside her. Safety was this cabin, this garden, the hens, Elias's figure returning each dusk. But her heart craved not only safety, it craved belonging, to be seen not as debt, not as property, but as a woman whole. She lifted her eyes to the Texas sky. The summer horizon burned crimson, clouds lit like fire. Beauty vast enough to choke her breath, and vast enough to remind her of the emptiness still within. That immensity magnified the question. If she stayed, was it surrender? If she left, was there any place in the world that would open to a black woman, empty-handed, once put to auction? Her lip pressed hard. Elias's voice cut the dusk. "Naomi?" She turned. His gaze held calm, but beneath it something deeper, waiting to see which road she would choose. Naomi nodded faintly, yet no answer formed. She stepped from the porch into the rows of green, brushing the cool leaves with her fingers. Each shoot was fragile, yet each reached upward regardless of harsh soil. She stood still in the garden, the red sky draped over her, wind tugging her cotton skirt. Inside, twin tides rose. Gratitude for safety, hunger for more than safety, for a sky wide enough to live as herself. Closing her eyes, she whispered to her mother across the distance, "Should I move on or should I rest here?" There was no reply. Only the hens clucking, the creek running, the wind whistling through the trees. Naomi opened her eyes, drew a long breath. And in that moment she knew. The answer could not come from her mother, from Elias, from any other soul. It could only come from her own heart. And her heart was still searching. Sunset swallowed the distant hills. The Texas sky burned like a sea of fire, clouds torn into streaks of red, gold, and violet. Naomi stood in her garden, soil clinging to her fingers, her gaze set on the horizon. In that light, her face glowed, dark skin catching the flame of dusk. Her curls had slipped loose, whipping in the wind across her cheek. Her deep eyes brimmed, not only with tears, but with a new gleam of resolve. Elias waited a few paces away, silent. He pressed no word, no weight upon her. The choice was hers to claim. Naomi drew breath, the ache of memory cutting sharp. George's narrow room, the coins hoarded, the jolting wagon west. Dust Creek's laughter when she stepped down, the crushing moment Henry's death was named. Thomas Walker's hand reaching to seize her like a parcel. And Elias, quiet, unyielding, stepping between her and the dark. Now, after all, Naomi knew what she longed for was not merely a safe roof. She lifted her chin into the burning light. Her voice shook yet carried clear. I crossed 1,000 miles to find a husband, but what I needed was not a man to buy me, but a man I could choose. The words rang out, cutting through the coming night. Not plea, not challenge. Truth, plain and strong. Elias's brow rose, and then, rare, a smile broke across his weathered face. Not triumph, not pity, but the quiet pride of a man witnessing a woman take back her life. He stepped forward, laid a rough hand upon her shoulder. His eyes promised nothing but recognition of her choice. Naomi bowed her head, not in surrender, but in freedom. The weight of years slipped from her shoulders. Travelers passing along the valley road glimpsed them. Whispers stirred, but the looks held not only scorn. There was something else now. Curiosity, caution, perhaps even respect. Soon Dust Creek spoke not of the mail-order bride or Walker's property, but of a woman who had written her own fate. Naomi cared little for gossip. Her hands were full, with planting seed, learning to ride her mare, patching the leaking eaves. Every task was answer enough. She had chosen to stay, not for debt, not for bondage, but because she willed it. That night the oil lamp shone from the cabin, warm across the garden rows. Elias sat on the porch in silence, as always. Naomi watered the last bed, set her pail aside, and joined him. No words were needed. The creek whispered, the crickets sang, and the weight of presence was enough. Naomi lifted her gaze to the star-pricked sky and smiled. Not the smile of masking pain, but the smile of one who had been bartered and belittled, yet found her freedom in choosing. Dust Creek would talk still. Thomas Walker would plot again. But Naomi no longer feared. With Elias not as master, but as companion, she was ready for any storm. Her story spread through the town like a testament that on the harsh frontier there were women who did more than survive. They stood and claimed their own lives. And so Naomi Carter's name lingered in Dust Creek, no longer as a commodity, but as a woman who answered the world with her own heart. When her story closes, perhaps each of us feels that quiet echo, reminded that what remains after storms is not wealth, but the choice to live free. If this tale has stirred a memory, a thought, or simply a warmth in your heart, leave us your words below, like the video, and subscribe, so we may keep alive the stories of the Western frontier, where love, courage, and kindness always find their way home.